Hello, welcome to This Week on Mustard TV. They had 57 MPs, now they're down to just 8. The Liberal Democrats have been discussing the party's future at their annual conference. Leader Tim Farron told delegates the goal was to get the party back into power at every level. But after such a devastating defeat, is it possible, and how long might it take? Well, with me to talk about the future of the Lib Dems in the UK and here in Norfolk is Norman Lamb, who's the Lib Dem MP for North Norfolk. Also with us this evening is politics lecturer Nick Wright and Simon Wright, who's the former Norwich South MP. Well, we'll hear from the panel in a moment. But first, let's see what the new Lib Dem leader had to say to reporters on his way into conference to deliver his speech.
It's suddenly just become the biggest conference in the history of the party. An hour ago we've passed the record, which was 2010, the biggest number of people coming to conference. And the message here is very clear. We've got the biggest space in politics open to us for a generation. Britain desperately needs a party that is liberal, progressive and economically responsible, and we will fill that space. I'll be calling upon the Liberal Democrats here to steel themselves, having had the result that we had in May. Against all the odds, we matter more than we've done for perhaps a generation.
Tim Farron speaking there. A very positive message, as you'd expect from party leaders. But I'm going to just ask you, gentlemen, to tell me in 30 seconds or so, what do you think the party needs to do now to win back the support it lost?
Well, it needs to start thinking again. I think we've got to win the battle of ideas. There's no guarantee that we will have a place in politics, that we will recover. We have to demonstrate to people that we matter. But I think fundamentally there is an absolute need for a progressive liberal alternative to the Conservatives. And with the sort of chasm that's opened up between Cameron and Corbyn, we have an opportunity, but no guarantee that we will succeed.
Nick Wright, what do you think they need to do as a party?
Well, I think Norman's right. I mean, I think the key thing is rebuilding. There are some very significant elections coming up next year in Scotland and Wales, in London. So these are opportunities for a new leadership with some fresh ideas, fresh packaging to kind of get out there and really connect with voters. Tim Farron came across as being very authentic in his speech last week. I thought that was very impressive. So it's a breath of fresh air. It's something new to engage the population.
Simon Wright, what would you like the party to do?
Well, I think we need to do three things. First of all, I think we need to be absolutely clear about our vision and what we mean when we talk about a liberal society. We need to talk about how we would empower individuals to get the best from their own aspirations in their own lives. Secondly, we need to make sure that we're being radical in the policies that we develop. I think Norman's been very good at coming up with some bold ideas, whether in the sphere of mental health or indeed looking at NHS funding more recently. And I think we need to carry along that train of coming up with the big ideas that will get our party noticed. But thirdly, we need to retain our economic credibility too. I think over that 5-year period in government, we were able to get a real understanding of how to govern and how to do so responsibly, and moving into opposition now, it's absolutely vital that we don't lose that.
Well, I wonder if the voters are ready to hear all of that. We've asked you for your thoughts on what would make you vote for the Lib Dems in the future. John got in touch. He said nothing. They lost all credibility with the tuition fees fiasco and getting into bed with the Tories. He would never trust them again. Also, we heard from Callum Ringer on Twitter. He said in the past he has voted Lib Dem and he even used to be a member, but in future he won't. He says pre-2010 they were progressive. The way the colours changed for the coalition showed no principle. I mean, Norman Lamb, you've talked a lot about why you went into coalition and the challenges that you faced, but the message isn't getting across. Why do you think that is?
Well, we're only a few months away from the election, so give us a bit of time. Callum Ringer, incidentally, is a Labour activist, so we must remember who we're hearing from. And I think we hold our heads absolutely high for what we did in government. I mean, in my own sphere of working on equality for those who suffer from mental ill health, introducing a cap on care costs for older people. And the interesting thing is, I think people will start to see the difference with the Conservatives governing on their own compared to the influence that the Lib Dems had in government. So, for example, the cap on care costs has now gone. That was a vital protection for older people with conditions like dementia. Within weeks of the general election, the Tories have abandoned it. And I think people will see what the Tories are like unconstrained by the Lib Dems and will recognise then the impact that we had in government.
Do you think, Nick Wright, that it would have been different if the Lib Dems had gone into coalition with Labour?
I think it would have been equally as problematic. I mean, I think it was, pragmatically, I think it was a very difficult situation for the Lib Dems to be in. If they hadn't gone in, in with the Conservatives, they would have been accused of destabilising the government, potentially leading to another election,
and flunking it, when we had our big chance, flunking the responsibility.
Indeed. And so, the responsible thing to do is stable government. And I think they were somewhat punished by that. But if we look back to 2010, there was this big groundswell of support. Nick Clegg managed to inspire a lot of people in the debates. And so inevitably, government results in disappointment. They're always going to be, and the longer you're in government, the more people are, become disappointed by compromise, etc. So.
And Simon Wright, John mentioned tuition fees. It's particularly difficult in the constituency where you were the MP, where there's an awful lot of students who felt let down over that issue.
Yes, but I'm very proud to see that so many young people from disadvantaged backgrounds over the last 5 years have been able to go to university. And although I personally didn't support the increase in fees, I've gone to great lengths to make sure that young people in my constituency know that there is no financial barrier to going on to study if that's what they wish to do. And we've seen record numbers applying from disadvantaged backgrounds. There is a trust issue here, however, and what we need to do is make sure that we communicate effectively that when a coalition situation arises, it does mean that every policy in your manifesto isn't going to be possible to deliver on. There is a natural process of give and take. The overall deal that we struck, I think, was a very positive one. It allowed us to take bold steps in terms of raising the income tax threshold, which again helped many disadvantaged families in my constituency, and it meant that we could repeal some of the authoritarian Labour legislation around things like ID cards as well. So I think in terms of many of the issues that I was campaigning on in the run-up to 2010, we were able to deliver on in government, but it came as a result of that negotiation process.
Norman Lamb, what do you think you learned from being in government? I mean, is there anything you do differently next time around?
Well, it's difficult. It's very, very challenging. And the great frustration, if you take something like tuition fees, we broke the pledge and we have paid the price for that. But actually the policy we introduced, as Simon said, we've ended up with record numbers of students from poorer backgrounds getting to university. We've maintained the funding for universities, which is absolutely critically important, and you repay based on your ability to pay. So actually the substance of what we've done, and the model is only because of us being in government, is progressive, and it's delivering very good results, but we were punished because we broke the pledge. I think we've learned about the absolute importance of communicating our message much more clearly. I think we lost identity in government. People were confused about what we stood for, and yet we were doing really good things, cutting tax, as Simon said, for people on low pay, introducing £2.5 billion for children from the poorest backgrounds in schools, and that's starting to have an effect, the cap on care costs. These were really good things, but I don't think anybody knew that we were doing it.
Nick Wright, do you agree?
Yes, and yes and no. I mean, I think one of the problems you've got is the increase in students in higher education is fantastic. What about the jobs afterwards? Increasingly, it is difficult for graduates to get, decent, meaningful, permanent positions. And that is the nature of the economy that we now have, part of which is a result of policies, perhaps conservative oriented, but introduced under the coalition. And I know we hear a lot of rhetoric.
We do now have a faster growing economy than most other European countries.
Yeah, but that's great. But what about the people on 0 hours contracts? What about the people who can't find decent jobs? I mean, the economy is definitely growing, but where are the benefits? Where are the advantages? And I think that's there is a gap now increasingly in economic terms. The other big thing, of course, is that you were somewhat wounded by the inability to get a change to the voting system through, and I think that would have made a significant difference. And that was a key sort of liberal Lib Dem idea going back a long time. It probably could have been handled much better, and this is one of the other areas of failure, I think, that's going to haunt the party in the future.
I wonder if the voting system is a problem for Lib Dems in the future, because if people didn't like coalition government, they're less likely to vote for PR.
Well, I don't think that the case has been proven that people don't like coalitions. I think that actually when you speak to people about what they think about politics and political parties, they do talk about wanting to see politicians work more closely together across political divides. And we were able to soften those hard right edges of the Conservative Party while we were in government, and the evidence of that is the agenda that the Conservatives have pursued since the election. I think that people want to see parties do what's right in the national interest. interest. That involves coalition. But I also think that people want to see a parliament that it genuinely represents public opinion. And when you've got a voting system that leaves some MPs with very safe seats in some parts of the country, whilst other parties miss out on getting adequate representation, and I looked at, particularly UKIP and Greens as massively underperforming, indeed the Liberal Democrats as well, then there is a very strong case for change there. Ironically, the system that we ended up having a referendum on was actually the system in the Labour manifesto, not the one in the Lib Dem manifesto. But I do think that the voting system does need to change as we move to a more multipolar and party form of democracy.
Well, I want to bring it back to Norfolk before we go to a break. And I spoke to a lot of voters in Norfolk before the election, and a lot of voters in North Norfolk in your constituency said to me, I'm not voting Lib Dem, I'm voting for Norman. They trust you, they like you, they respect you as an MP, and I wonder
That's encouraging.
It's good, but can you get over that in other constituencies and build on that and build on the strengths of support that you've got locally?
It is a challenge, actually. The way you break through under the system we've got, where you have to prevail in an individual constituency, means that you have to build up a sort of personal reputation. And I think in a way it builds trust with people, because people see that you're doing the job, you're trying to do it effectively, and you put everything you've got into it. And so I think that inevitably ends up with quite a personal vote. Translating that into a support for the party, I suppose what I have to do is to demonstrate to people that if you like what I'm about, I am a Liberal. You're voting for an approach that's a Liberal approach. As Simon said earlier, it's giving power to people, giving power to communities, not dictating from on high. So if people like that, then we've got to encourage people to go out and vote for it.
And the personal really, really matters here. And the other thing as well is local councils, a number of local activists as well. You've got a good activist base that gives you a very good jumping off point.
Well, we'll talk more about that in part 2. Stay with us. We will be talking more about how the Lib Dems can do what they can do to win more votes in Norfolk in the next election, so stay with us. Hello, welcome back. Tonight we're talking about the Liberal Democrats and asking what they need to do now to win more votes in Norfolk at the next election. The party lost 49 MPs in May and its role as part of the coalition government. At the party's conference last week, the new leader Tim Farron told supporters he wanted them not to settle for opposition, but to be serious about getting the party back into power. But can the party win enough support here in Norfolk to make a difference? On the panel tonight is North Norfolk MP Norman Lamb. Also with us is politics lecturer Nick Wright and the former MP for Norwich South, Simon Wright. So, gentlemen, we started talking about the local picture. I'll start with Simon Wright. What do you think the Lib Dems need to do to win back Norwich South, for instance, your old seat?
Well, first of all, we need to regroup. We took a bit of a battering at the general election, obviously losing my constituency, which is a hard thing for the team to take, having worked so hard over the last 5 years towards this election. So I think regathering, regrouping as a constituency organisation, building up the troops and the membership. It's really fantastic that we do actually have 80 new members in Norwich since the general election.
The sitting MP is making a big impact, isn't he? He's got quite a high profile. He's a member of the shadow cabinet.
Any MP, when they're newly elected, is going to want to make an impact early on. And when you've got that incumbency factor, that does make a big difference when you have the opportunities to raise profile of local issues in Parliament, but also through the local media too. So we need to regroup as a campaigning unit, make sure that we're out there speaking to people in the city, delivering the newsletters, knocking on doors and finding out what the local issues are, as well as campaigning on those national issues that Tim Farron will be raising, whether that's mental health services, which we know need to improve locally, whether it's housing, and we're in desperate shortage of adequate housing across the county to meet families' needs, or whether it's on the environmental issues too. We know there's great support for green policies in Norwich. It's an area where Liberal Democrats have always been very strong, and we can see outside of coalition now with the Conservatives jettisoning, sadly, many of those policies that we'd progressed through coalition on the environment.
But Nick Wright, in Norfolk it's going to be a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Because it's traditionally seen as perhaps Labour green in the city and Conservative in the countryside.
Absolutely. absolutely. Although that said, I mean, Tim Farron's kind of pushed sort of a number of really important policy areas, amongst them rural economy and housing, and these are big issues where we are. So if that results in some, you know, meaningful, tangible sort of policies that people can sort of get their teeth into, so to speak, then that can make a difference. But it's all gonna kick in terms of the local elections. Can the Lib Dems start winning back seats and sort of county council, city council level? Because that's where people can really see a difference in their day-to-day lives, and that's going to be very important.
They're not well represented at the moment, are they? It's 3 on the city council and about 10 on the counties.
Yeah.
There's still quite a lot of work to do.
Absolutely, but where they're in a position, for example, of holding the balance of power in a council, for example, that could be important. I mean, I think to be fair to Simon, he in the last election he was defending a sort of a small majority in what is, you know, generally quite a safe Labour seat, which has had a very strong, you know, quite a large number of people sort of we might consider sort of coming from deprived backgrounds. So Clive Lewis really sort of tapped into that, and he is, you know, he's one of the stars of the new Corbynista movement, you might say. So that's going to be, I would say, that's going to be quite tough for the Lib Dems. But as we move out into the county, things might be a bit different, particularly at local level.
Is the Lib Dem movement strong enough in Norfolk, Norman Lamb? Because have you got enough activists on the ground to make a difference?
Well, we've taken a big hit. That's the first thing to accept completely. But we've had this extraordinary influx of new members in North Norfolk. I think it's about 140 new members since the general election, and these are all people who actually liked the fact that Liberals were in government, doing good things in government. And I think we've got to convince people that there is a purpose here, that there is a point in the Liberal Democrats. But I come back to this point that it's really dangerous to have a sort of one-party state, and if the Tories start to believe that they're in power for a long time, they become arrogant, they become complacent, and for the good of democracy we need an alternative, a progressive liberal alternative to the Tories. Labour's chosen to go off to the far left. It's a sort of far left takeover. It's quite significant. It's the most dramatic event in modern politics in this country, I think. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasm within the Labour ranks, the rank and file. But does that represent views in the country and people's anxieties about ensuring that we maintain discipline on public finances, but also try and make the society fairer? I think that gives us an enormous opportunity, and that's the way in which we rebuild.
Well, let's ask our politics lecturer, what does this Labour shift to the left mean for the Liberals?
Well, it's quite interesting. I was reading an article by Michael White of The Guardian a couple of days ago, and he talked about Tim Farron being Corbyn compatible in the sense that they're both, in their own way, talking about very similar things. They're talking about fear and grievance having been a driving force behind how people voted in the last election, but also huge increases in inequality, a lack of fairness, a lack of sort of justice within society. So, yes, ostensibly the election of Corbyn was a big shift to the left. But if you look at how he's managing the party, or not, according to some, if you look at the kind of policy statements that have come out of the Labour conference, you know, there might be more room for compatibility than at first appears. So I think it's possibly not as dramatic a shift as we assume it is. Only the next few months will tell.
Do we think some of these Labour MPs dissatisfied may move over to the Lib Dems in the coming months and years?
Well, what I do know from talking to several Labour MPs is that there are many people who are deeply anxious about what's happened to the Labour Party, and there's no doubt. I mean, you know, there's a sort of moment.
Anxious enough to move, do you think?
I wouldn't predict that at this stage at all, because I mean, you know, we have to be realistic. We've been reduced to 8 MPs, so in a sense, I think our task is to demonstrate our purpose and our relevance through developing new ideas, developing a clear agenda which is attractive to people and which is seen as an alternative to the Conservatives. And I think if we can do that and demonstrate that it's electorally popular, then you might start to see people deciding to shift to us. But I don't think that will happen at the moment. But be in no doubt, there are enormous irreconcilable differences between many on the moderate side of the Labour Party and those now in control.
Simon Wright, what do you think?
Well, there clearly is a spectrum of opinion within the Labour Party, and I think we have to see how it plays out with Corbyn and McDonnell. I think that some of the moderates might have been quite reassured that it wasn't quite the Communist Manifesto that we heard in Corbyn's end of conference speech, but nonetheless, he has not yet started to show us what his vision is for a government. What is Corbynism? At the moment, it looks very oppositional. It looks clearly there's a lot of things that the Conservative governments are doing that he doesn't like, but we can't yet say that there's any alignment in terms of vision or sense of purpose that Tim Farron has, for example, with the Liberal Democrats, where we have a very clear liberal vision, a radical force which is neither on the hard right nor on the hard left spectrum of British politics. That's where we need to be, and we'll wait and see what emerges from the Corbyn regime.
I think much more importantly, though, is what we haven't talked about: the Conservatives, the party in government. I mean, they set the legislative agenda. They set the agenda in many other ways. So we could talk about kind of relationships between Lib Dem and Labour and whatever you like. The fact is, what the Conservative government does in the coming months is going to define how opposition takes place, and I think that's really important.
I totally agree with that. And in the immediate period after an election, you have a rather false position. There's a honeymoon for the new government. But I think as time goes by, I mean, I take my own area of health and care. The NHS in this next 5 years faces a sort of a massive challenge for its very existence, and the care system, very many elderly people not getting the care that they need, and the government not committing the resources needed to maintain it. Now, that will lead to unpopularity, there is no doubt. It could be this winter, it could be the winter after, but the system, I believe, is facing a crash unless more resources are found for it. So on issues like that, where I think we have a compelling offer to make, particularly about equality for those suffering mental ill health, I think we can get traction with the public and people can see that our relevance again.
And you did a lot of work on mental health, and there was a big promise on spending. Is that going to be fulfilled by the Tories from what you can see so far?
Well, so Nick Clegg secured £1.25 billion for children and young people's mental health in the budget back in March. That meant 250 million extra every year. This year, the government has actually offered 141 million, not 250 million. So already there is a fear that they are reneging on that promise. They've already reneged on the promise of a cap on care costs to protect people from catastrophic cost if they have dementia. So these are the areas where Tories on their own, I don't think can be trusted, particularly to look after the most vulnerable people in our society. That's where we have to make our pitch.
We've only got a couple of minutes left. Let's think future. What kind of policies, what would your priorities be, Simon Wright, for getting the party back on track?
Well, I think Tim has already started to identify where those key policy areas have to be. I do think housing is a crucial one. I do think mental health and how we cope with the pressures on the NHS overall is absolutely crucial. I also think as an identity issue, we need to keep pushing the environment, and I would like to see big, bold ideas coming in how we protect our environment at a time where both the US and China are very clearly identifying the green economy as an area of growth. We've got a Conservative government that's retreating away from that, and we're going to be left behind.
Nick Wright, what do the Lib Dems need to do, briefly?
Clear economic message. I mean, I think they've got the advantage of having recently been in government, so they've got a sense of what's going on there. But yeah, as Simon was saying, having some clear ideas on a small number of important policy areas: housing, rural economy, mental health, green economy. These are very clear areas where they can make an important contribution.
Last 20 seconds, Norman.
And I agree with all of that, but we are also an internationalist party, and we have a massive judgment to come up about whether we retreat from the international stage, retreat as a nation and stand on the sidelines, or whether we punch above our weight and maintain our place in the European Union, albeit that we need to reform the way it works.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting discussion this evening. That is all we've got time for. Thank you to all my guests for taking the time to speak to us. Do keep messaging us with your comments via Facebook and Twitter. You can find us at Mustard This Week, but that's all for now. Good night.